Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe, but you can call me KC, and today we're doing our regular monthly reading wrap-up and TBR video, which I obviously wrap up my books that I read in February and my favorite book that I read in February, and then talk about what I plan to read in March. I can't lie and say that February didn't quite go as well as I thought it would in terms of my reading. Don't really know quite for sure why that is. I did get through a couple of decent books, but I didn't get through nearly as much as I thought I would compared to, say, January, for example. But despite the lack of books this time around, I would say the quality has overall been more than acceptable. So let's go ahead and talk about February's reading. Starting off, I did read A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan, book 7 of The Wheel of Time this month, and I would say overall it was solid. It wasn't the best book in the series, but it was definitely not my least favorite book in the series either. I would say probably the short explanation for this is that there were some things that I was a little bit more underwhelmed by, and some other things that I was kind of surprised by in terms of like the pacing and stuff like that. It was pretty much comparable to any other Wheel of Time book, and in that way I would say I don't really believe that a slog here exists. At least if it does exist, this is not part of it inherently, and overall I was pretty satisfied with it. Like I said, not the worst book in the series. I would say of everything in the Wheel of Time so far, I've rated everything either 4 or 5 stars. This is one of the ones that I would rate 4 stars, but even amongst its company of the other 4-star reads, it's probably ranked a little bit higher in that category. So that's to say it's probably middle of the pack, but by the time I've read 8 books in here, it's probably no surprise that one of them that I reads is somewhere in the middle. That sentence made no sense because I put an S on reads where it didn't belong, but that's okay. Next up, I did read Red Rabbit concurrently with A Crown of Swords. Crown of Swords was my main weekend read, and this was the one that I would read in the mornings before going to work. And this book was fantastic. I would say the vibe of this was exactly something that worked for me and something that I wanted and needed at this current point in my life. Been feeling kind of a Western vibe for a good little while, and Red Rabbit kind of satisfied on that, and also satisfied on some horror-esque elements as well. There's a very supernatural element here, a fantasy light kind of area to that as well, and those kind of combined to this being a supernatural Western horror type of thing that I think is super enjoyable. Like I said, the vibe is great. Say the characters are all very distinct and enjoyable, and one of my favorite things about the book is that it has one of the better resolutions of anything that I have read, in that basically every character who you meet and plays any form of significant role in the story, even if just, for a handful of pages, has some form of resolution in here, not least because of the supernatural element. And I think that that's really cool and beautiful, quite frankly, and I really enjoyed it. Next up, I did finally finish off reading Monster. So volumes 8 and 9 were the only things that I had left to do, and I got through both of them. Really fantastic stuff. I would say volume 8 was fantastic, and I plowed through it in just like a single day. Really great material. Volume 9 was also stupendous in that, like, the climactic arc, Ruhenheim, was amazing. Even if I wasn't super stoked on the very ending of it, the last few chapters of chapter 9 kind of soured me on some certain things a little bit. I thought about it for a good long while and wondered if I would come around to it, and I don't think I have, unfortunately. But overall, I really enjoyed the climactic sequence, found the way that all the plots kind of converged together and the way that some other things were revealed and utilized was really great. Volume 9 also had probably one of the greatest plot twists I've ever read in a book ever, even though it's manga. It's not technically a book the way that we normally think of them, but same difference. It was just super satisfying and great, and so I loved both of these volumes, even if I didn't quite love the actual ending proper. But that takes me into my book of the month. What would I consider my book of the month for February? Well, based off the way that I've been talking on these things, it's probably no surprise that Red Rabbit is my favorite book of what I read here, even including A Crown of Swords and including Monster. If I was going to include the manga, I would say volume 8 is kind of up there with some of my favorite things that I read this month, but Red Rabbit was overall my book of the month. I really enjoyed this, and I think that anybody who's ever itching for something Western related, and if you're into sort of supernatural horror stuff, definitely give that a shot. I thought it was great. But that takes me into this month's reads. What do I plan to tackle in March? Well, the first thing that I plan to tackle, I have technically started already, and that is The White Country by Boston Tarrant. This is my first physical arc that I've received from anybody, unless you count Return to Adan by Philip Chase, in which he sent me a physical version of that book, and it was a few weeks before the book actually came out. It's not technically an arc, it was just a regular edition of the book, which he offered me, and which I didn't, accept under the agreement that I would have to have it reviewed or anything like that. So it's kind of really hard to say that that was an arc. For traditional means, I would say that this is my first official arc, and it's another Western book, but this one is a little bit more historical Western compared to Red Rabbit being a supernatural Western. Even though Red Rabbit takes place in post-Civil War America, this is like actual historical Western, I would say. So far, I'm about 40 pages through it, about a sixth of the way in the book, and it started off solid enough for the moment, but I could definitely see how it could go in certain ways that are maybe a little bit more questionable. The general premise and the topic of it is something that could very much lend itself to browbeating and not necessarily in the good or satisfying way. It's not to say that I don't have faith in Boston to do that, because I've never read Boston's material before, so I have no reason to think one way or the other. All I'm saying is that I could see this being a really great execution on what it's trying to do, or being something perhaps a little bit heavy-handed. I will, of course, let you guys know how I feel about that next week. Actually, at the time of this video's release, is when this book is scheduled to come out, March 11th, and I plan for my video review to come out on that same day. I'll probably have my Goodreads review up either on that day as well, or in the days leading up to it, depending on when I actually finish the book. I only have about a week at the time of recording this video to actually be able to finish that up and get the review done. So that is pretty tense. Thankfully, it is short. And to be fair, I'm not required to actually do that at this point. I accepted the arc saying that it could potentially be April or maybe even May by the time I got a review out for it, just based off of certain scheduling stuff. And I just happened to make the decision that I'm going to do that review next week and on the day of release instead. So that pressure is entirely on my own hands. Besides The White Country, the next book that I want to read is another short one as well. This one is barely 300 pages. Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton. If you're paying attention to the film universe out there, Mickey 17 is coming out in just a couple of days from now at this video's release, and that is a movie inspired by Mickey 7, because it's kind of the same premise basically, but they increased the number in the title. The premise of this one, it sounds pretty fun and interesting. Just kind of glancing at the first couple of pages of this one briefly, I think it's probably going to be something in that sort of a Andy Weir vein of sci-fi potentially. And if so, then that's definitely something that could be really great. I hope that means that with the length, and if it is kind of written in that kind of Andy Weir way, and I'm not going to say that it needs to be, but it seems like it might kind of tap into that similar type of tone, which case I could definitely plow through this one as well. I hope to read this one more or less concurrently with The White Country, so long as The White Country continues to go quickly and well, so that I can review it on time. I want to read Mickey 7 at the same time. I'm doing that one as a read-along with the Red Company Discord, the Sun Eater fan Discord. And we're doing that because of the movie coming out. So I'm going to be reading the book, and then I'm going to be seeing the movie here pretty soon as well. And I hope to be able to compare them in the next Fortnite on the Isle video, I guess, for example. Next up on my TBR is something very, very much not modern, like that last book was. Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, a book that has been on my pile of shame for a good, decent while. This was one of the monthly classic read-along books in Mike's Book Reviews Discord server way long time ago. And by way long time ago, I just mean in booktube years. I've been running this channel for a little over 3 years at this point, and it was about 2.5 years ago that this book was a monthly read-along pick, and I haven't circled back around to it at some point, but it's been on the top of my priority list in the meantime, because I've wanted to circle back around to it, and I'm really looking forward to actually getting to it now, finally, having actually scheduled and committed myself to it. Definitely going to be a little bit of whiplash reading some Dickens after having read Robert Jordan and Alex Grecian and these other couple books that I'm going to be reading here and am reading right now, I guess. Reading some manga as well. Going and jumping back and finally reading another classic again is going to be pretty difficult probably, but I'm looking forward to it and hoping that it is successful. I have several friends who really enjoyed it, and I don't have any reason to believe that I wouldn't, so I'm looking forward to it. But aside from that classic, I have another modern book that I hope to get through this month, but this one is a little bit more variable. I think it's dependent on how quickly I'm able to read A Tale of Two Cities, following White Country and Mickey 7. Stephen King's The Dead Zone. I finally want to circle back around and read more Stephen King. Last year, I did read a couple of his books, Long Walk and Rage, but those were both rereads, so I kind of knew what I was getting into when I read both of those. Aside from those, I didn't really read any Stephen King for the past, 2 years at this point, so it's been a long time coming for me to finally continue his bibliography more or less in chronological order. The Dead Zone is the next one of his books that I want to read. Then I have a couple more of his that I want to read a little bit later this year. And so I'm finally going to pick up some Stephen King. I was hoping to be able to read this in February. This was one that was on my February TBR, if I'm not mistaken. But then just taking way long time to read Red Rabbit. Even though it's a quick read, it just took me a lot longer to read it than I thought. Crown of Swords also went a little bit slower than I thought it would, so I didn't end up having the time to pick this one up, but I hope to be able to get to that soon. For the maybe read section, if I'm able to get through all of these, the only thing that I want to add is that apparently Red Rabbit has a sequel coming out on March 11th, so here very soon. If I have extra time to read that book here at the end of March or something like that, maybe early April, I would maybe like to throw in that sequel called Rose of Jericho and actually be able to read that sequel. Truth be told, I'm not sure how I feel about a sequel for Red Rabbit existing. Because like I said, that has one of the best resolutions of a book that I've read, and I'm not entirely sure that it needs a sequel. I could see exactly where he could build off and do a sequel. I look forward to reading that nonetheless. I really enjoyed this one, so I would hope that I could enjoy the next one. So if I get my hands on a copy of that and I have time this month, there is a chance that I might pick that up. I think it's a good bit shorter than Red Rabbit already was, so I have no reason to believe that it would be too huge of a commitment. But yeah, that is my TBR for March and my wrap up for February. Trying to keep my expectations in a little bit better check this month as a result of February. And by better check, I mean I have a couple short books and then a couple longer books that I may or may not be able to get done. Not trying to schedule myself too fully, but every time I say that, I end up throwing in random stuff just kind of on a whim anyway, which I would like to do less of. We'll see if I'm able to be successful with that. There's a good chance I'm able to do a little bit more with my reading this time around, and I really hope so, because April through May with my reading is going to be really, really bad. It's going to be really slow on account of my work schedule. I'm going to have a heck of a lot less time or energy to do any reading, so I hope that I'm able to do a decent amount this month. Even if it's not a whole ton, I hope to be able to get through at least what I have scheduled. With that being said, thank you guys for watching this video. If you did, let me know what you guys have been reading, what you guys plan to read in the near future. For now, I have been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.